I brought Pauper decks to the party. Pauper. I brought Pauper decks to the party.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the one, the only, the PDH pod, a Magic the Gathering podcast dedicated to the total exploration of the Pauper Commander format. I am your host, Brad Drac V, and this time around we've got a huge table, so I'll start with my co-host from the East Coast. First up, Alcadron Dave Vader. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. I am too hot. I'm ready for winter, but otherwise...
Did you get some of my heat?
Yeah, I don't... Can you take it back?
No, I'm done with it.
Okay, but you live in Missouri, so I feel like this is unfair. Like, I didn't sign up for this.
No, I feel like I never do, but we always get it. Next up, and fresh out of finals, is the PDH PhD. Liam, how are you going? And welcome back to the show.
Yeah, I'm doing all right this week. Sorry I had to miss last week. I did have a couple finals for some summer classes. But joke's on you, Brad, is new summer classes started yesterday, so...
Oh.
Yeah. That's life.
Oops. Well, I hope the school's treating you well. I don't know how you managed to juggle such a schedule. I would not be able to pull it off.
School is treating me well so far. I managed to juggle it with my youth.
Oh, there you go. You definitely have that on me. There's no joke about that. All right, and then last but not least, this is a special episode, so please help me welcome our very first guest to the show. They are a pillar of the Pauper Commander format, a commons-only master chef, if you will, and some have even called them a format father figure. It is Papa Pauper Ryan Roberts. How are you doing this evening, and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Howdy, everyone. Yeah, doing great today. Really stoked to be here. I've been watching with bated breath every new release of episodes that you all have, and really enjoying the insights into the format, card evaluation, all that. It's been awesome watching this channel grow.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, you were definitely one of the first PDH, I guess, community members we reached out to. I think even before we recorded the very first episode, we were like, okay, as this thing gets rolling, we want to have a list of people we'd like to get on the show, and boom, here you are about 6 weeks later.
No, I'm flattered and super happy to be here. I'm glad to be among friends and fellow experts in the format. This is quite the dream team you got going on here.
Yeah, we try. So far, so good. But yeah, basically, we wanted to have you on sort of an expert's point of view. Like last week, Dave and I went over the basics of what some quote-unquote format staples look like when you're comparing them to regular EDH versus PDH. So we're going to kind of take the flip side of that. We're going to take that same philosophy, but we're going to put it towards 60-card competitive Pauper versus PDH versus Pauper Commander. I think you are especially skilled at being able to identify new cards. Will they fit here? Will they fit there? What sort of archetypes? That sort of thing. Just because, as I've gotten to know you over the last year and a half or so through Discord, you're very prolific in PDH, and it actually took me a while before I knew that you're almost as prolific in regular Pauper too. Building your community, hitting tournaments, getting the scene started, all that sort of stuff too. So it should be a pretty good episode. I think we went pretty deep last time, and then we'll just kind of see what we can come up with this time. So I do want to start off. Many of our listeners may not be familiar with who the Papa Pauper is. So if you don't mind, give them a little bit of a background, your background in PDH, what sort of brought you to the format, and then I know I got the name wrong, but you're part of a deck submission committee, something like that. I know I totally messed that up, but
it's the Pauper Commander competitive Pauper Commander deck database.
There we go.
And yeah, I am one of 5 committee members for that. Yeah, so my background just starting Magic in general. I kind of began when my French exchange student gifted me a whole box of Invasion, and I really clearly remember the eternity of opening up packs, and I managed to snag all of the legendary dragons from that. Like Daragaz was kind of my favorite, and got pretty hooked. Had some friends who were really smart people who were playing, and kind of first deck I built was a burn deck built around Form of the Dragon. which is an
Okay.
awful card. But for a burn deck particularly, given that it's a 7-drop, but you can't die, kind of, so that's cool. And yeah, so what really solidified it though was that my uncle gave me his collection of Draft Shaft from the very beginning. Gave me an enormous quantity of old cards, and so yeah, that was a really lucky and fortuitous entry into Magic, and ending at about 5th Dawn. I took a break between then, largely spending my time playing video games instead, but returned back to Magic as my desire for more social interaction in my gaming became more pressing, and wanted to actually enjoy games with people face to face. And so I came back to Magic around Kaladesh, took a shot at Standard, took a shot at Modern, and largely found them just to be atrociously expensive, and kind of got burnt out on that. And that really directly led into starting kind of the nascent Pauper community here in Bellingham, Washington, where I live, at what is formerly called Dark Tower Games. Now it's going to be Aegis Games. They're going through a bit of a rebranding. I just watched a video from the professor on Is It Blitz. Realized I had all of the cards except for, I think, Ponders and Preordains just in my collection, and was able to build that, and then quickly found that I actually had enough to build like 5 decks. So assembled those, and that was really the beginning of the battle box. So ever since then, I've been really deep into Pauper, but only in the paper scene. I've done a little bit of MTGO, but largely found it to be a pretty unsatisfactory experience, as you'll be no doubt unsurprised to hear, Brad.
Yeah, that client's definitely not for everybody.
Yeah, not everybody enjoys playing on an Excel spreadsheet. But hey, you know, I love the Pauper format, in particularly in paper, and this local community here has grown to actually, we were mid-pandemic running the largest regular Magic the Gathering events in all of Bellingham for about a year straight. We had like 36 people coming in on average every Monday. And then on Fridays, we more recently began to host what we call Pauper After Dark, which is our Pauper Commander specific evening. Kind of themed around like old speakeasy vibe. We've got these tables with little headlamps that would go over the top of them that only project light on the table. We turn the lights off. There's glow lights along the edges of the room. So it's a really cool vibe. And that one, we were getting attendance of, you know, about 15 people on average every week. So yeah, and really the Pauper Commander thing started mid-pandemic. We were getting really bored of running tournaments over Zoom, but to adapt to the pandemic, we started running these tournaments, and ironically, people were joining us from all over the world for these cash tournaments where the winnings would go to the charity of the winner's choice. We eventually, after 56 weeks straight of doing tournaments every week through the pandemic, we got bored. And they say that
I can imagine.
I'm sure somebody at some point has said boredom is the mother of invention. I know I'm butchering that. I do know it's necessity is the mother of invention. But yeah, we decided we wanted to play multiplayer, and one of us introduced Pauper Commander. And I don't remember who it was, but we started with a couple of decks. Somebody had Mist Meadow Witch. I had Slimefoot the Stowaway. These will be very, I'm sure, very familiar in a casual, from the casual standpoint. And it really just kind of took off, and everybody started building them, and it got really exciting. Joined the PDH home base and found a huge community of people playing there, and kind of immediately sunk my teeth into Crackling Drake, Witherbloom Apprentice, and Murmuring Mystic, which are probably the 3 CPDH decks that I'm most well known for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's kind of the story of how I got into Magic, Pauper, and then PDH.
Yeah, all kind of rolled into one. I didn't realize you were, I don't want to say new to PDH, but I guess just the way you present yourself with the format, the decks you create, the sort of community that you've put yourself in, it feels like you've been around the format for forever. You know, you just have that sort of wealth about you, I guess.
No, thank you. Well, you know, there's people that have been playing a lot longer than I have, and a lot of them. There's, you know, posts going back, you know, what, do you know exactly how long PDH has been around for? Does anyone here? Is that?
I started right around the beginning of it, and that was 2013-ish, right around
So 9 years.
yeah,
Going back.
Yeah. So
the original Theros.
I am but a baby in comparison to a lot of folks when it comes to that. However, I would say, oh yeah,
I
go
have
ahead.
very fond memories of watching you enter the PDH home base and like try to do casual a couple times, like, and then like realize I just watched you like sink into this like casual is not for me, and then Witherbloom and Crackling Drake, and then it was off.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that was just that's my 60 card pedigree coming through, which is cutthroat. 60 card. There's never ever a question about whether
Exactly.
you're supposed to brutalize your opponent
Yeah.
and take advantage of their
At the,
weaknesses. And
at the time you
100%.
joined, Sniffhound and I were kind of trying to do this like weekly like pals meta-ish game thing. And you had availability when we were free, so we kept on bringing you into those games and like playing super casual, like I attack you with Howling Golem, don't block with your 4/4, give me Monarch, like, and like just watching you like sort of suffer through that, and like guys, I think I need to change. Like, oh yeah,
Yeah. I mean, those are fond memories, though. And I remember touching base with the PDH Pal stream when you went to visit in, man, several years ago, right? Or a year and a half ago, maybe. Yeah, super fond memories. The Pals meta, for those of you who are unfamiliar, which is probably no one, given that you're here, Alk, is the best meta. I will say it. You heard it here.
Yeah, I agree. Totally.
It's great. It's so much fun to watch, and it's a really cool way to dive even deeper into like the plethora of interesting cards there are at common, because you actually go even beyond the very powerful interactions of CPDH into interactions that are very powerful if nobody has interaction for them, and that's awesome. It's really, really a good time. But yeah, I think just because of the 60 card pedigree, I've always been kind of a competitive player. The CPDH is what eventually kind of hooked me, and yeah, and then started going at it that way.
So how did you, being so kind of new into the format, how did you work your way into this the database, the deck submission database?
Yeah,
that I'm never going to be able to say correctly.
It's the competitive Pauper Commander. So you could just say CPDH deck database is
Okay.
one way I would say it. Yeah, so part of it is that during the pandemic, my career was disrupted, and I had a lot of time on my hands. I poured that time into things that helped keep me sane. And part of that was that, I live with my folks. It's multi-generational living here, and keeping them safe from COVID was pretty important. So my social life was really restricted to just being on Discord. And so, from that, I had a lot of time to dig into the format and made some claim to fame, I suppose, on like particularly combo-less mid-range decks, I would say.
Okay.
And part of that, just with that time, is I had a lot of time to write primers. And
you are known for your primers.
My primers are I'm pretty proud of them. They're pretty fun to write. My mom's an English teacher, so I've got a bit of a leg up there. But I do have to say that a lot of what makes my primers look and feel good is what I learned from Yalaran, from the PDH home base. Also a member of the RC, prolific deck builder, combo extraordinaire, kind of the brainchild of Loreweaver, Layweaver, and Puresight Marrow, and Parcel Beast, and Is it Guildmage. Those are, I think, some of the decks that they're really well known for.
Puresight Marrow? Did you say that one already?
Puresight Marrow, yeah, exactly. And so his structuring of those, using the coding to structure things in a really intuitive way, is really one of the things that sets my primers apart from the average. And I just love sharing that with people, showing people how to write nice primers. And so, the way I got into the deck database was through the Tryhards. Clay, who's also a member of the RC, has his own server called the Tryhards. They do EDH and PDH content, primarily focused around competitive. And he and I became quick friends, primarily bonding over how to build Crackling Drake, which at the time, the discussions for competitive were kind of around, do you build it as a flicker deck? Do you build it as a control deck? Or do you build it as a Voltron deck? And so that's kind of where we connected there. And our correspondence just led to, greater roles and responsibilities in his server. And then when he came around to wanting to build an alternative to the tier list run by Crash and Yalaron, one that's unranked, just more of a sampling of all the different powerful things you can do that's unranked, he invited me to join in on that. I think mainly on the back of the fact that I'm able to get a lot more games in of CPDH than a lot of people. So I've got, just because of my paper meta access, it just,
sure,
a lot of people rely on
sense.
Discord. So yeah.
Yep. That sounds like a pretty seamless process. I know I guess that does make sense what you mentioned about, Discord kind of being your only social outlet for a while. Because even in like the Pauper Guild Discord, it was just, a lot of times it was you and whoever else was talking, but you were always there. It was pretty nice.
Oh yeah. Discord was a hell of a lifeline.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think something that I've talked about with my buddy Bobby, he goes by King Great in the tryhards and also on the home base. He also plays in my local meta. Something that he talks about quite a bit is that folks that come to PDH and CPDH come from a lot of different angles, but two of the ones that I commonly see is people coming from Pauper to Pauper Commander, or people coming from EDH to PDH.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that coming from Pauper, my understanding of like powerful cards is different than folks who come at it from an EDH standpoint.
Sure.
I think that shows in the way that I built decks. It also shows in the way Bobby builds decks. His claim to fame is building Crypt Rats, which is potentially one of the most cancerous decks to play against. It's so brutal.
Yeah.
You ever seen a man go to 81 life? It's crazy. And Crypt Rats is his namesake card. That man puts Crypt Rats in every deck. No person has brewed around a card more than Crypt Rats and Bobby. So
okay, I'll have to keep that in mind.
He'd be an interesting guy to talk to about this. But he talks about that often. That people come from Pauper have a different read on what's good in what kinds of archetypes than people who come at it from the EDH standpoint. So.
Yeah, I think that's totally correct. Because even when, on Twitter, for example, if I'm talking PDH with just a whole thread of people, a bunch of commenters, you can always tell who like the EDH, the true EDH players are, because they'll mention a card like, oh, have you ever thought about XYZ card? And it's always an uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Not a creature, but like a spell or an enchantment. It's like their rarity in their mind just stops at uncommon.
Yeah.
Like doesn't go further than that.
Totally. Well, and I've taken I've actually on a couple of occasions gone through every single common and uncommon ever printed. And that's partially because there was a point in time for Pauper, as you will know, that the format was divided into paper Pauper and MTGO rules Pauper. And this is the dark ages of Pauper. This is a dark time when cards like Battle Screech, Dark Ritual, Chainer's Edict, some of the most iconic cards ever printed into into Pauper were only available online.
Right.
And there were stores where they would play MTGO rules, and there were stores where they would play paper rarity, where the rarity of the card had to be common, so you couldn't play Battle Screech. And then there were also cards in paper that were never printed online. A really good example of that is Rust, which is an instant green. It's green instant counter target activated ability from an artifact, which is disgusting if you're a graveyard deck. If you're playing like Cycling Storm, which is a deck built around Songs of the Damned, Street Wraith effects, and you eventually kill them with Draneth Stinger, that deck with Rust is able to counter everything but Pajuka Bog that targets graveyards meaningfully. And that's really strong. So you don't have access to that online, but you have it in paper. But, we didn't have Chainer's Edict in paper, nor Battle Screech, which were, cards that, as you know, they define whole decks. Like mono black devotion decks without Chainer's Edict looks really weird. Battles like Boros Bully or Boros Rally decks without Battle Screech is not a deck. And so eventually those were unified in a big push by WotC. They mimicked the shared legality setup that Mox Boarding House in Seattle uses.
Mm-hmm.
And Mox Boarding House in Seattle, for folks who don't know, is kind of the storefront for Card Kingdom. They have an amazing store in both Ballard and in downtown Seattle. And they ran Rags to Riches, which was kind of known to be one of the largest Pauper events in the U.S.
Oh, yeah, it's still talked about.
They're huge. I don't know that they've gotten back to running events yet, actually. I think the tournament that I'm hosting here soon is going to be the first one in our region since since the Rona.
Since the Rona.
Yeah. So anyways, yeah, they basically said the new rules would be any card printed or released online as a comment at any time is legal in Pauper. And that was unification was what it was called. So
yep, that was huge.
Yeah. And so because of that, I had to look through every card. Cards like Merchant Scroll were legal in paper, but not legal online. And you better imagine that card was broken in,
how wild
in
was
paper. I mean, people, when they were playing Tireless Tribe combo, which uses the card Tireless Tribe, it's 1 white for a 1/1. You can discard a card to give +0/+4. You inside out it, switch its power toughness, make it unblockable, kill somebody with 1 shot by discarding your hand with a gush. And that deck, when you could tutor up your circular logic for your counterspell, you could tutor up your inside out. It was really disgusting. Lost to that at Rags to Riches all the time.
That deck I think was probably the biggest deck that got hit by the Gush banning. One of the biggest for sure.
Yeah, I mean it was Gush, Daze, and Gataxian Probe were all cards that that deck played, and they all went out on Blue. Was it Blue Tuesday? Is that what they called it?
Blue Monday.
Blue
Monday. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. They also simultaneously killed my favorite deck, which was Kiln Fiend. Is it Blitz? Died in a ball of fire.
Well, yeah, we've kind of sort of touched on specific cards here and there in the different formats. You know, if you're wearing kind of both hats, your Pauper hat and your PDH hat, and we get some new cards entering the system, downshifts or a brand new set or what have you, how do you go about evaluating these new cards? Sort of as a general rule, not necessarily card by card. Like, are you sitting down thinking, okay, I need 60 card Pauper cards? Are you sitting down thinking you need PDH cards? Or is it just sort of like, just kind of pick your brain about how you see a card and how you evaluate it?
I'm going to pick both.
Okay.
One of the coolest things, if I can make a pitch for PDH and Pauper, is that spoiler season is incredibly exciting. I mean, and I don't even play the other formats really. I've dabbled in Legacy, but I will have a Talrand Sky Summoner deck that is literally just Angry Birds with Murmuring Mystic, but switching out Airborne Aid for something else and then just putting in Talrand.
Nice.
That will be a deck that I do at some point. But it's so exciting when the vast majority of cards that are released in every set have huge potential. The playing of Pauper means that a lot of the cards that are released aren't actually going to be useful. There might be between 3 and 7 new cards every set that we'll see play in Pauper. I think that's about right. It fluctuates a little bit, but generally speaking, the power level of Pauper is extraordinarily high. Like, the deck that I used to be really obsessed with was just Rakdos Reanimator. Exhume into Ulamog's Crusher on turn 1 off of Dark Rituals and Lotus Petals is like is like the strongest feeling thing I can possibly imagine in Magic. It feels so cool. And so based on that power level, you really have to push past cards like Ponder, Brainstorm, Preordain, Exhume, Dark Ritual, like the Monarch cards, Counterspell, Spellstutter Sprite, Snuff Out, Bolt, Cast Down. I mean, the cards, and then if you're an Infect, like, you literally play the same deck, but without Inkmoth Nexus. So for any new card to be coming into Pauper, it takes a pretty high bar. That is not so for PDH. And it's not because it's not powerful, but because as a singleton format, you're always looking for replicate effects. You're looking for what's the next 1 mana, instant speed, 3 damage to target creature effect. You know, you're looking for like Fiery Impulse, Frostbite, even Strangle is probably an option because it does hit Planeswalkers too, which is a whole nother conversation. But for me, that's relevant.
Right.
Strangle is definitely a staple right now. We choose that over Flame Slash because of that effect. Demon Bolt, you've got so many different things where there's going to be cards that are going to be really exciting for Pauper, and then there are going to be cards that are really exciting for PDH. I think more recently those cards have started to cross over. A good example of this would be Boarding Party and Annoyed Altasaur, which are some of my favorite commons ever printed. For those of you unfamiliar, they're 6 and 7 mana. They're really big, and they cascade. That's kind of all you need to know. They're red and green.
They're real big.
They're real big. Boarding Party is a 6/3 haste. Altasaur is a 6/5 trample. Both have cascade. They kind of go in the same decks. Altasaur does have reach, which is pretty game ending against certain decks. It didn't need that to be good, but it has it. And those cards were good examples of cards that were great in 60 card, but really didn't have a place in CPDH, I'll say specifically. I'm sure in PDH it was all stars, right? Like their value, they're big, they're Timmy, big dino, big pirate, slap them up. I mean, these seem like Pal's Meta staples. Yeah. Am I wrong? Okay, yeah. I mean, these are great cards. And, but, we're starting to see, particularly as I've been pushing towards mid-range decks without combos in them, that those cards actually start to look a lot better in that context. They're recouping value by cascading, so you're going to get something from it. Or at least you're going to trade up on resources with a player with 2 counter spells. And they slap hard, which in Mr. Orfeo is disgusting.
That's brutal.
And Mr. Orfeo is a very spooky CPDH deck that I've been working on. The Boarding Party and the Altasaur just look great in there. And so you're starting to see more of that crossover as the mid-range archetype is explored more in CPDH. It's largely unexplored, I would say. And so those crossovers, are it's one place where I'm able to draw some inspiration. One of the other places you're going to see.
Go ahead.
Follow
up quickly on something you said a moment ago. About when a new set comes out, you're looking at which of these cards is going to make an impact on the Pauper scene, which of these cards is going to make an impact on the CPDH scene. One of the things that's been very fascinating to me as sets comes out is that I got into the competitive scene in the competitive PDH scene a little while ago, and something that I find interesting is that sometimes you get a set like Neon Dynasty, which has big implications for the competitive side of PDH and big implications for the casual side of PDH. Like that set was just a gold mine for everything. And sometimes you get sets where you only get one of those. Like Commander Legends Baldur's Gate was huge on the casual side. Like completely changed all of my casual decks. Initiative is crazy, but but it had there was almost nothing in...
Tell me about it.
in terms of combos, at least, there was almost nothing in Baldur's Gate for the competitive side of things. Like, most of my competitive decks changed not at all with the Baldur's Gate release. So, like, is that a thing that you see as something between the CPDH and the 60-card Pauper scene? Like, is there a set that, like, had a big impact on one but not the other? Or is there a set that, like Zendikar, I feel like, had a very minimal impact on PDH? Is that something that had a huge impact on Pauper? Like, can you imagine a set where it was one but not the other?
Yeah. I think that happens pretty often. Oh boy. I mean, this is a juicy topic. Like, Commander Legends is, on the competitive side, a lot of the limits that we're seeing on the power, on the impact of Commander Legends on CPDH is based on the backgrounds and the common rarity of the most powerful backgrounds. So the fact that the common Candlekeep Sage is very broken. We should be clear about that. In a non-combo sense, we're talking about divination being attached to your commander every single time it's cast. Now, I'm a mid-range guy. It's what I do. A card that rewards you simply for playing the game and casting the commander that you have, and then punishes your opponent for killing your commander is like
insta staple.
Did you guys?
Yeah, I mean, and
instant staple.
Instant staple, and yet on the flip side, that card is a combo card. Like,
and on the flip side, I mean, it's also just even in casual pods, it's still a powerful interlude, let alone from being an instant staple. You don't have to be comboing off to get a crap ton of value out of it.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just
I mean,
there.
it's very, very easy to envision games where you draw 6 cards off of a Candlekeep Sage.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, you can compare it to kind of like the new Rhystic Study in some ways, right? We've got a spell that is going to come down early, and it's going to generate you an absurd amount of value over the game.
On the one hand,
It's going to be less...
Marsh Crocodile exists, and you can just cast Marsh Crocodile and bounce itself to your hand, and then cast it again.
Yeah.
Like, that's a thing you can just loop.
Oh!
On the... right? On the other hand, outside of Candlekeep, I feel like Baldur's Gate was very
I
low
really
impact on the
didn't
competitive
think
scene.
about that.
Like, we got no new counter spells, like, compared to, like, on the heels of Neon Dynasty. Like, Neon Dynasty gave us a new 2-mana counterspell in Disruption Protocol. It gave us Tamio Safekeeping. It gave us brand new combo lines with Careful Cultivation. Like,
Yep.
Neon Dynasty
Great
warped
card.
the face of the competitive scene. And, like, outside of Candlekeep, Baldur's Gate was very low impact on the competitive scene. So, like,
Yeah.
what sets are doing this, but with
It did.
PDH versus Pauper?
Yeah. So, I mean, if we look at Commander Legends Baldur's Gate, I think that there are a couple of standout cards that make their way into CPDH. They are, I think the biggest thing I would name is the adventure cards are exceptional. Were just an insane addition to the format. The adventure cards with Sword Coast Serpent in particular it's just I'm playing it in a lot of decks right now. It's very good. Goggles of Night is another great example. We've got all the backgrounds. All the initiative cards are good. We got Blur, which is a new flicker effect that draws a card.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Blur for sure.
There's a lot of cards here that strike me as very powerful for Pauper and very powerful for casual PDH. But I wouldn't say that we are without good cards for CPDH. Some examples would also be Chain Devil, which is the new 4-mana 4/2. It's Slum Reaper. When it enters the battlefield, each player is going to sacrifice a non-token creature. This card just absolutely hoses Murmuring Mystic if it resolves. It punishes decks like Nightveil Predator that use Rotten Reunion to protect its commander from edicts by creating 2/2s instant speed. Armor of Shadows, granting Indestructible for 1 mana at instant speed. We have all of the Invoker cards, which actually are being integrated into some really interesting deck building that I'm seeing in my local meta, where if you have infinite mana, you can activate these things infinite times, and they become a way to combo off while also just being a value engine. They're combo-less cards in a sense where there is an outlet, but they also do something reasonable on their own.
Right.
But again, like, Miracle's Edict is another one. That's the 2-mana, roll a d6 or roll a d20. Either somebody sacks a creature, or each player sacks a creature, or each player sacks their biggest creature. And Nefarious Imp. So I actually think on CPDH line for Baldur's Gate, the impact is yet to be seen, because people are really excited about people are very distracted by the presence, the discussion around the rarity of the backgrounds. I think, for one thing, it's a very distracting conversation because it's frustrating in some ways, and
frustrating in many ways.
Yeah, it is. And we should clarify that in my local meta, we allow all commons, and we allow all common backgrounds, all common planes, or all uncommon planeswalkers as well in the CZ.
Ooh,
yeah,
spicy.
Yeah. But there's actually a lot of cards here that just haven't seen integration yet, like Nefarious Imp. This card is broken. 2 and a black, 2/1 flying. Whenever 1 or more permanents you control leaves the battlefield, scry 1. This is Viscera Seer, but without having to be the sack outlet. It's flying. It's in black, meaning it carries a cranial plating like a boss. And it triggers off of blood tokens and treasure tokens, which is disgusting. If you go...
Yeah, it's not just creatures. It's
anything.
everything.
So you crack a treasure, scry 1. Use the treasure to pay for the blood, crack the blood, scry 1, draw your card. You can go 3 cards deep with that.
Right.
And it was manaless. So this card is gross. We also got Merit. So a lot of the benefits of this set were actually on decks that have yet to see inclusion on tier lists and on the database. So it was really big for Mr. Orfeo. It was really big for Mayhem Devil. It was really big for any Rakdos or Black X deck. The inclusion of not just one, but two good Black Initiative cards. And for those of you unfamiliar, Initiative is insane. And don't even get me started on 60 card. Initiative is, in the right deck, it's better than Monarch by a whole hell of a lot.
Yeah.
We got Breath Weapon, the new 2-mana sweeper. Zentarim Bandit. I actually think that Commander Legends Baldur's Gate was actually pretty huge for CPDH, but it's just there's a lag time on when these cards see play because they're not cards that go into combo decks. And I think a lot of people gravitate towards those decks when they come into the format. But sets that did a lot for PDH, I think this set was also really big too. Breath Weapon is a really interesting new addition because decks that wanted to be able to kill all the fairies and specifically the Crimson Fleet Commodore could not do it with Fiery Cannonade. And now Breath Weapon does.
Did you transition to 60 card Pauper?
Yeah, this is for 60 card
okay.
Pauper. Yeah, sorry. Yep. I just kind of smooth brained my way into that segue. But yeah, there's a lot of really interesting stuff here for Pauper as well. Ingenious Artillerist is a big one for both PDH, CPDH, and Pauper. Whenever one or more artifacts enter the battlefield, you do damage to everybody on a 3-drop body. This is a staple in Rakdos burn decks in Pauper, in 60-card Pauper. Ones that were playing Reckless Fireweaver before are also playing this now, triggering off of blood tokens and things of that nature.
Well, there were so many Baldur's Gate commons that were just either not available on MTGO or extremely limited because they put them in treasure chests or whatever they do. That they actually put out an announcement today that they're adding 36 Commander Legend commons to MTGO, and it actually said that there's 38 of them exactly, and they said that anybody that played a Pauper League pretty much any time in 2022 is going to get 2 of each of these cards.
Wow.
That's how bad the Pauper community wanted these cards in their hands.
Well, I mean, this is a really interesting segue into...
And most of a lot of them are the gates.
Yeah, the gates.
Things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people brewing around the gates and Guardian of the Guild Pact right now.
Yep.
Because that's a deck in of itself. Usually Guardian of the Guild Pact, which is a 3 and a white for a 2/3 protection from monocolored, kind of unkillable in a lot of ways. That card was an archetype staple for Pestilence decks. It allowed you to maintain your Pestilence in play while pinging everything down and chipping them to death. And Pestilence was kind of destroyed in a large part in 60-card Pauper by the banning of Baldur's Ornament, which allowed it to draw cards when the Tron player was drawing cards, and also to draw cards in general with their untapped mana. So the new thing is to use Basilisk Gate and the gates to make your unblockable, unkillable creature huge.
Yeah.
And it's very good. I haven't seen anybody do this yet, but that's I guess that's just kind of what I like to build. The initiative cards are insane. I'm very surprised to see how undervalued those cards are in the sort of hive mind of the MTGO Pauper community. Initiative, I've been playing, let me put it this way, I played Initiative wrong for a month and I was going 3-0 most of my nights. Initiative paired with Sword Coast Serpent is disgusting.
Yeah, it's wild.
Sword Coast Serpent being a spell and a creature means that off Throne of the Dead 3, you flip that thing into play as a 9/9 unblockable hexproof. And that's if you
That's fine.
Yeah, it's just like nuts, right? And then in the early game, it's a 2-mana bounce, which is surprisingly relevant against decks it's just surprisingly relevant that I can go from 13 removal spells in my mid-range initiative deck to 17. And the threats are also just like, they're just card advantage. It's early on, it's bounce. Later on, it's just a giant threat that ends the game. And so initiative is something where a lot of 60-card players have totally slept on it. I built a deck. I haven't kind of published a whole lot about it yet, but it's called Grixis Dominatrix because it loves the dungeon, specifically the Undercity. And it is a wildfire deck with all the artifact lands. It's got cast downs, Chainer's Edicts, bolts, galvanic blasts. And then it plays 8 initiative cards. It's playing Eric Cochran Sneak, and it's playing Vicious Battle Rager. Mole Drifter, Brainstorms, because it's the best Brainstorm deck in the format when you're playing Wildfire and Geomancer's Gambit, and you're shuffling 3 times off of every cycle through the dungeon.
Right.
And yeah, and actually, that's a funny segue, because the exploration into that is what got me to consider Initiative for PDH. And my last games I've played with Initiative were disgusting in CPDH. Mayhem Devil flipping Reckless Fireweaver into play, with 3+1/+1 counters and hexproof is not okay. Flipping Falconwrath Noble into play as a 5/5 black flying hexproof creature that dies to nothing is not okay. Flipping a Chain Devil into play with a Mayhem Devil in play is not okay. So Initiative is definitely is making waves, at least in my deck building. And then cards like Sword Coast Serpent. We also had a bunch of amazing rocks. We had Decanter of Endless Water, which is such an amazing card, the new Thought Vessel.
Yeah.
But it makes colored mana, which is so relevant in so many decks. And then the other one being Lantern of Revealing, which is likely to be a cross-format staple between PDH, CPDH, and Pauper. Because I think, if I was to guess, and I think I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about this, Brad, I would venture to guess that Tron loves Lantern of Revealing. If those of you who don't recall, Baldurs Ornament was banned in 60-card Pauper. It basically ate the bullet for Tron and the Urza lands. Urza's Tower, Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, which cumulatively produce 7 mana, because 1+1+1 equals 7. And Baldur's Ornament allowed that deck to fix its mana, ramp, and draw cards with its huge mana advantage. Mm-hmm. Lantern of Revealing is almost better than Baldur's Ornament in Tron. Like, flipping a Tron land into play at instant speed is not okay.
Right. Yeah, I think this is...
People haven't caught on to it yet, but just mark my words. It does everything that Baldur's Ornament does, but better for Tron.
Yeah, I mean, your opponent's second main phase, sure, you could draw a card off Baldur's Ornament if you tapped it, but you couldn't play that until next turn if it was your third land or the piece you were missing. This one, like you said, you essentially scry a land into your hand, and oops, look at that. Now I all of a sudden have an extra 3 mana.
Oh, would you look at that? It's Growth Spiral every turn, and it's fixing your mana. But make no mistake, this card is one of the best mana rocks in PDH and in CPDH.
And it's sorry if I can interrupt.
Go ahead, hop on in.
I know when we were doing a CLB set review, I looked at Lantern of Revealing, and I'm like, this thing is a sleeper. I wasn't sure where it was going to do its thing at, but I can look at it, and you look at the name Lantern in a card, and you assume it's going to do something stupid.
Yes,
right,
and
confirmed.
Absolutely.
And and I don't play Tron in 60 card, but I'm looking at that, and it makes a lot of sense, like you're saying.
It's a deeply offensive looking card. People haven't caught on to it yet. They will. It will bring Tron back as a real deck, because the Pauper Commander rules, not rules committee, but they're the format selection or format panel. Pauper format panel, is that it?
PFP? Yeah, the PFP.
Yeah. So the PFP voted to unban Expedition Map, and just like awful. So such a mistake.
Wild.
Yeah, pretty wild. For those of you that don't know, Tron in Pauper, in paper in particular, was an abomination. And
100%.
People would win games 1 very, very slowly, because it's a toolbox deck with every card tutorable in it. They would win game 1 very slowly. They'd prison you out of the game. You'd be under the illusion that you could win the game for a long time before you lost. And then the person could slow play and never finish game 2 and lock you out of the game, but not actually win. Maybe like threaten to kill you over 20 turns with a Mole Drifter.
Right.
It was a real it's a bad deck for paper. Online, it's curtailed by the fact that there's a chess timer, and the chess clock makes Tron hard to play.
And Pauper Tron is what modern players wish modern Tron was.
Yeah, totally.
Because, modern players like to complain about their version of Tron, and looking at plays of that, it really doesn't happen until games 2 and 3, when that deck just kind of sets its lock, because it requires the sideboard to get the right hate pieces. Yeah. In Pauper, it just, because the format is naturally so slow and grindy, it has that ability to just run everything hate in the main 60. and
Oh,
it
yeah.
doesn't need sideboard to win. So it
Oh yeah, you've got decks where there's like, you've got your capsize
yeah
to lock the table out. You've got agony warped for the that you can reuse over and over for the what is it, the Guardian of the Guild Pact. You have your one of suffocating fumes for bird tokens. You have your one of cast down. You have your one of a braid. You
Yeah.
have and you just reuse these spells until the opponent vomits and passes out.
Yeah, pretty much.
And
Yeah, until they just walk away from the table.
until you walk away from the table. It's awful. So, so in terms of card evaluation, that will be one that I think will make a big impact. Now, Alcadron, you were kind of asking about what sets had that split, right? Where you've got cards that were good in Pauper, but like maybe not amazing for CPDH or for PDH.
That specifically is what I'm really curious about, because like in my mind, I mean, I guess you talked about Baldur's Gate a lot, but in my mind, Baldur's Gate was a set that was like really good, or not very good for CPDH, I think, yet. But it felt like the kind of thing that was going to have a big impact on Pauper. So I'm wondering if there's anything else that like has a big impact on CPDH and not a big impact on Pauper. Like how was Neon Dynasty received in the 60 card Pauper community?
So Neon Dynasty brought us.
It
was
wasn't
that
really.
Neo is the code for that?
Yeah.
There was 2, maybe 3 cards. Everybody was calling for a Day Zero Moon Circuit hacker ban.
Yeah.
And that never ended up going anywhere.
People got really freaked out by Moon Circuit hacker because I think a lot of people have like trauma from like losing to fairies.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that card was getting spoiled right when Mono Blue was like everywhere for some reason.
Yeah.
Well,
And that card got spoiled.
It was the Mono Blue deck for. Just to give a recap on it, is your Ninja of the Deep Hours. Or so actually, we should start from the beginning. It's a fairies deck. It should not be a Delver deck. I'm going to make that hot take. There's a lot of people playing Delver in that deck, and it's awful in that context.
No, you should be fairies and ninjas.
Fairies and ninjas are where we want to be. The fairies all have ETB value. They've got evasion, so they're great for ninjutsu. You ninja in Ninja of the Deep Hours, which draws cards when it connects, or the newly printed with Neon Dynasty, Moon Circuit Hacker. Moon Circuit Hacker is an amazing addition to the archetype. It's probably better than I think it's a bit better than its kind of predecessor with Ninja of the Deep Hours, because it allows you to go turn 1 fairy, scry 2, and then turn 2 play another island, ninjutsu in your Moon Circuit Hacker, and then hold up Spell Pierce or Dispel. And that's what's really so much better about it, because a lot of these fairies decks are kind of praying that you don't sorcery speed your removal, or that you don't kill their ninja when they ninja on turn 2. And that is that's not how I like to play Magic. That sounds really scary. Every time I play fairies and I go turn 2, Ninja of the Deep Hour, and they kill my ninja, I'm kind of going to lose the game. And the ability to go turn 1 fairy into ninja with protection is very good. It's very, very good.
Yeah, it's huge. It's the next level of
turn
ninja.
3, you go, ninja in your you go cast your fairy, or you go with counterspell backup, or you go Ninja the Deep Hours on your Moonsnare or sorry, not Moonsnare, but the Moon Circuit Hacker, so that you can actually draw a card and you've still got Dispel up. There's just it's a lot of gross play patterns. So that was a card that was hyped pretty hard. It's very good. It's great for the deck. It did not break the deck. It just made it better at what it should have been doing all along, which is playing a tempo game, not a control game.
Right.
So
people were super freaked out about it when it was spoiled.
Yeah, I think
there were a lot of other, in my mind, CPDH powerhouses from Neon Dynasty. Like, did Tomio's safekeeping make waves in the 60 card community?
No, Tomio's safekeeping does
very
not.
little bit.
Yeah, you could potentially play it in a deck where the pump from Snakeskin Veil doesn't matter, and you just want to gain the life.
Yeah.
Or it could also see play in a deck that wants to protect its permanence, because notably, Tamio's Safekeeping is a great card. I could wax poetic about this card. Protecting permanence.
That's amazing.
It's so good, and it's not just it's hexproof and indestructible. Like, wow.
Right.
and
But like it didn't
does.
even
Yeah.
really see play in
Shuts down
Stompy, maybe
land
in the
destruction pretty
sideboard,
hard.
but
I mean,
it just
yeah, you'd rather play Snakeskin Veil in those
Yeah.
decks, and someday, mark my words, Blossoming Defense will be downshifted. Okay, but in terms of Neon Dynasty, I will say that there were
That-
some cards from Neon Dynasty that fundamentally broke Pauper. Okay, Experimental Synthesizer.
crazy.
Wow, is this card
Wow.
disgusting. I
Yeah.
played a game against my girlfriend with Experimental Synthesizer and drew 6 cards,
Mhm.
bouncing it with Glinthawk and Core Sky
Mhm.
Fisher.
Yep.
The
That was one of my
the-
favorite decks right
like,
now, or it
dude.
was, I guess, before this new meta.
the card is the one of the most powerful sources of card advantage ever printed on a common. I mean, it like, and the fact that it also like, okay, let's just imagine this card just said 1 red. When it enters the leaves the battlefield, exile the top card of your library. You can play this card until end of your turn. And it didn't say 2 and a red, sack it, make a 2/2 vigilance warrior token. Like, it would be really insane. This card would still be making waves. But the fact of the matter is like Rakdos burn decks and Pauper now have a card that not only produces a threat, but it also generates repeat card advantage while also triggering Ingenious Artillerist and also triggering Reckless Fireweaver. It's very strong. It plays lands off the top too because it's play the card, not cast it. Experimental Synthesizer is insane.
That Boros deck you were talking about,
Yeah.
it runs some of the decks run Kuldotha Rebirth with it.
Oh yeah, there's a
Sacrifice it to get goblins. You can do with makeshift munitions, sacrifice it, ping somebody, draw a card.
Okay,
It's
look
wild.
Look
It's
at this
just
deck.
wild.
Think about this. Goblins is a deck that largely fell off because of the sweepers, Fiery Cannonade and Breath Weapon.
Right.
Ended the career of Goblins. And at one point, Goblins was one of the best Pauper decks in the format. And the reason was that this was actually back when combat damage went on the stack. There were cards like Mog Fanatic could deal combat damage and then sacrifice to ping things. And in a format full of elves and fairies, it was just amazing. But that was kind of its high point, and ever since then, it's struggled. And this is a deck that's playing I always get them backward. Goblin Cohort
Conscript?
and
Cohort.
Mog Conscripts are the
that's
1
it.
mana 2/2 creatures that can't attack unless you've successfully cast a spell this turn.
Right.
That's errated to just cast. And then they would play Goblin Bushwhacker and Goblin Grenade, and it was like it had like Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Bolt, and it had all these threats that could come out like Valley Dasher, Mudwort Brawler, I want to say Mud something, these are just 2/2s for 2 with haste, and that deck now with Experimental Synthesizer plays the same Goblin strategy. It plays Foundry Street Denizen. It's playing Goblin Bushwhacker.
Bushwhacker's huge.
It's
yep.
huge. You're playing Mog War Marshal. And then you're playing Kuldotha Rebirth alongside Experimental Synthesizer and Great Furnace in your mana base. And then the one other way you get the artifacts is with Voldaren Epicure. You can sacrifice the blood token for Kuldotha Rebirth. And if you've ever seen somebody go Kuldotha Rebirth with a Foundry Street Denizen into a Reckless Bushwhacker, it's so cool. That's a lot of damage.
Yeah, that's a ton of damage.
And that's card
even the
advantage.
Boros decks were running Bushwhacker for a while in the Boros decks.
Yep, it's great. This card will also at some point probably be seen in some sort of like a Boros mid-range, maybe Initiative or Monarch deck where they play Foundry Helix, which will be a colorless red-white, sack an artifact. Is it sack an artifact or a creature as an additional cost?
Yeah.
And then you deal 4,
I'll
gain 4.
double check that, but I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's like Lightning Helix, but a
It's
lot
like
worse.
if you sacrificed an artifact this way, you gain 4 life.
Yes. Oh, so you don't have. Oh, so you do have to sacrifice something, but you don't gain the life. If it's a creature.
It just says sacrifice a permanent.
A permanent.
And deal 4 Yep. And if an artifact was sacrificed this way, you gain 4 life.
Yeah, so that sounds great. Like a mid-range control deck loves to have targeted removal that also enables its value engines, that also gains it life to stabilize. So there's another place we haven't seen a home yet, but it making huge waves. So that's a good one. Some of the other cards that haven't seen widespread play, but that I think are going to see fringe play, are the emergence cards. We have Crackling
I
Emergence.
love a good Zendikon. Yeah.
Yeah, Zendikons. Going back to Wind Zendikon and some of those other ones where you're essentially enchanting a land and making it into a creature. If that land is indestructible because it's a bridge, then the creature is indestructible. So you get my drift.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. So Crackling Emergence is great. Those emergence cards might see play in some sort of like a combo deck, but you could also just play them in a Wildfire deck. Cleansing Wildfire, targeting your own bridges that are also creatures that are drawing you cards and indestructible is disgusting in a format where everything destroys and very little bounces. Another one I think that's a really big deal is the Modern Age, and this one actually took a long time to sink into the online psyche around cards.
Yeah, it really did. I was surprised.
Yeah, I was kind of on this one like a bloodhound from the very beginning because I love Reanimator, and I've been trying to build a non-Rakdos Reanimator deck for a long time. It wasn't in the books, it wasn't in the cards. It was too slow. It wanted to play removal to slow down your opponent, but if it did, then it brought the threats back with Exhume. It was just really awkward. Like, wanted to be a Delver deck, but it wasn't fast, and it didn't want to play counter spells because it was reanimating Striped Riverwinders. It was just awkward. Esper Reanimator is very much a real deck because of Modern Age. The fact that it's triggering twice, it's 1 in a blue for a Saga, and it loots twice, and then it turns into a 2/3 flyer. A 2/3 flyer blocks everything that flies in Pauper.
Yeah.
Blocks every fairy. It blocks every ninja on the ground. It
Skyfisher.
blocks Squadron Hawks. It blocks Glint Hawks. It blocks Core Skyfisher. It blocks Battle Screech tokens. It's great. And it also doesn't come down as a creature right away. So it just generates a lot of advantage. So that was a big deal. And I think those were kind of some of the more highly impacted. There are people brewing around Kami of Industry.
Yeah, that one saw a little bit of play.
Yeah.
I know Reckoner's Bargain really boosted Affinity quite a bit.
That's an important one to talk about. Reckoner's Bargain, 1 in a black instant speed. It's an additional cost to casting the spell. Sacrifice a creature or an artifact. Gain life equal to its CMC and draw 2 cards. The reason that was such a huge deal is that Affinity traditionally had kind of a bad burn matchup. And now Affinity can loop Mirror Enforcer, gaining 7 life every time, and then bring it back with Blood Fountain.
Yeah, and while drawing cards. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Gaining 7. And in fact, like Affinity, y'all should probably know, we're going to timestamp this on the 12th of July, 2022. Affinity is still broken after 4 ban cycles.
Yeah.
It absolutely is.
They banned.
Everybody's distracted because of all the new shiny cards we got, but Affinity is still busted.
It's still busted. I think there's a lot of. We ought to be really considering whether the untapped artifact lands were ever okay in the first place. But not to go too into that. But Reckoner's Bargain was massive.
Well, I'm just coming from the standpoint with Affinity is I was always on the train that people complaining about Affinity just don't know how to play against it. Until I went and judged SCG Con last October.
Whoa, cool.
And Brad, you might remember this. I was pretty active on Twitter that whole weekend. And people like, what's the metagame look like? What's the breakdown? And
Artifacts.
Easily two-thirds... Artifacts was the metagame. But easily 2/3 of the meta was Affinity. The issue is no 2 Affinity decks looked the same. And I'm not even saying they had 3 or 4 cards. No, the colors were different entirely. You could be playing any color combo you wanted as long as you were playing either black or red. And the decks that were playing both were insane.
And that doesn't even, you can also play Grixis with no problem. Yeah. You can also play blue-black if you want.
There are no land issues outside of green. So it's just, I can't, and Affinity is one of my favorite strategies.
It's a cool deck.
Before that weekend, and I just can't fathom. And like you said, after 4 ban cycles, how people
so they lost Prophetic Prism, Atog, Disciple of the Vault.
Yeah.
And then they banned. What was the last one? I'm missing something here about what was banned. Maybe it was just those 3 cards.
Yeah, because they hit Baldur's Ornament in the same
Baldur's Ornament. So, there might have been one other that I'm missing. But the deck has largely replaced ATOG with makeshift munitions, which is in some ways a lot scarier because if they at any point resolve that during the game, that is their win condition. They will kill you with it, and they'll kill everything you've got with it while drawing cards. Now, another card that made a big, or not a big, but some impact is Mirror Shell Crab. It's not widely played in Pauper, I would say, but Mirror Shell Crab being able to stifle abilities is relevant in matchups where it's relevant in certain contexts. In Cascade decks where you actually want this to be a counterspell, it's actually better that you don't cascade into it. So the mana cost is really relevant. Being 7 mana meant that you wouldn't cascade into it with Boarding Party or Altasaur.
Right.
But it was a counterspell in your hand, and then you could just play it as a threat for 7 and win the game with it. So that was one place that it saw play. And then Network Terminal is another card. This is one of my favorite cards in Pauper Commander, and right now, this is probably another card that... This is a card that sees play in the combo versions of Tron. The combo versions of Tron are Fangren Marauder decks with lots of rocks, and they crack the rocks and they gain lots of life and they make lots of mana and they draw tons of cards. And Network Terminal being able to tap like chromatic spheres to loot.
Network Terminal
while it
was the
ramps
other
and
card I was
fixes the
going to
mana.
ask. Like,
So
this card has
wild.
made huge waves in the PDH community.
Oh yeah,
dude,
I was originally so off this card, but I couldn't even tell you why.
it's so good.
It's so
this
good.
is
Like,
one of my favorite mana rocks in the whole format right now.
Yeah.
It's insane. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, now that we're kind of talking about specific cards and how they play out in the formats, what are some, like for you specifically, Ryan, like when you're looking at a deck or you want to build a deck or you're looking at your collection or whatever, what are some cards that come to your head where you're like, well, I need 5 of those because I need 4 for my Pauper deck and 1 for my PDH deck? No question about it. Like, what are some of those like crossover giants? I guess?
Boy. Well, the funny thing is when I go into the shop on a new set release, I do get some compensation from the shop in exchange for my time, a little bit of store credit, and I will come in and usually buy 12 of a card I need. Because
12?
because my battle box is 40 decks.
Get on
I have
my
40
level.
Pauper decks, and they all need to be kept updated and maintained. And so cards like
that's rough, yeah.
Deadly Dispute was one of those
Oh my
cards
God.
that was very hard. I used a lot of store credit to update that. There were, Deadly Dispute was one of them because it went in the Boros burn deck, or sorry, the Rakdos burn decks.
Rakdos
it
burn,
went in Affinity. There's other homes for it too. It particularly, the Deadly Dispute actually fed a deck that doesn't see as much play as it should, which is the Mogwarts combo. Mogwarts, for those...
That one actually just did really well, I think,
Really?
in Paupergeddon, Italy. I feel like it just won a big tournament recently, but I can't remember which one.
That surprises me not at all. The deck, when I play against it, is so scary. It's first day of class, Putrid Goblin. You're putting counters on things that enter the battlefield. Putrid Goblin, if you sacrifice it, gets a -1/-1 counter. You get the +1/+1, cancels itself out. You get infinite LTBs, ETBs. And if you're sacking it with a Skirk Prospector, you get infinite red. So that combo in Pauper is insane because you get great tutors to find it. Like you get Goblin Matron. And you also, which can find almost every part of the combo. You can also get Shred Memory to find the first day of class. Deadly Dispute meant that they just threw artifact lands in their deck, and now they have another way of drawing cards that doesn't lose them life, like the other one did, which was Night's Whisper. People played Night's Whisper, and now it's like they just play a card that's just every way better, right?
Yeah, better, right.
And so that was a huge gain for it. So that's one of those cards that really just like hit home hard. A card that doesn't do that but is worth mentioning for Pauper is Okiba Reckoner Raid. This is the 1-mana Black Saga. First 2 triggers are
vehicles.
each one, you
The
lose
rogue,
1,
yeah.
you gain 1, and then it makes a
Not
2/2 menacing
that'd be a very
rogue
different card
that
if we give all
grants
your creatures
itself
menace.
and creatures you control
already
have
really
menace,
good.
and then it has menace. And it's vehicles. Yeah, sorry, vehicles you control have menace. Yeah, it would be even better than it already is. This deck it's really good because the decks that care about rogues are actually burn decks. And so they're using like Prowl cards, particularly Morsel Theft with this. So this is great. It's burning them. It's insulating your life total. And then it eventually makes an evasive threat that's also a rogue. So this card made a splash. Not a big one because Black Rogue Burn is not like... It's not an excellent deck. It's a it's a good deck.
Yeah, it's more fun than good, I think.
Yeah, it's fun. It does powerful things. I mean, it's important to say, but it's not over the top busted. A card that I think could make waves from Neon Dynasty would be Sky Swimmer Koi as a combo card. This one's 3 and a blue, 3/3 flying. This one is CPDH and PDH playable as well. So I guess this one doesn't really fit into that. But it draws cards every time an artifact enters the battlefield. It loots. Spirited Companion probably goes in every casual PDH deck ever in white, right?
Yeah,
the goodest
for
boy.
Sure. The best boy, yeah.
But I think it's also a big include for Pauper because it was, white now having good draw is kind of really good. So yeah, there are examples of that. We haven't seen it yet, but Tron could be built around Thundersteel Colossus, crewing for 2
I
with
would
a
love
Muldrifter.
to see that.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Yeah, so I think every set becomes exciting because there is that dynamic of like, wow, like which of these formats that I play gets the juice? And a lot of times it's all of them.
Yeah.
But notably, Pauper is the one that usually gets the least of the insane cards because the power level is already so high. Yeah. I think a good example would be, which set was printed with Llanowar Visionary and Sarulf's Packmate? That was Kaldheim, right?
Kaldheim.
Okay.
Well, no, Kaldheim had the Packmate. Llanowar Visionary was
Packmate.
M21, right?
Oh, the
M22?
Visionary
M21.
was it was a core set.
Llanowar does not
Okay.
exist in Kaldheim.
Okay.
Llanowar is
point.
on Dominaria.
That's a Dominaria thing. Yeah.
There you go.
Those are, Kaldheim is an interesting set. I think Kaldheim gave a lot of good cards to PDH, but had like virtually nothing for Pauper, if I recall. I mean,
Yeah, the
Packmate
snow
was-
duels, that was literally
the
it.
snow duels were a huge impact. That is,
Huge,
Yeah,
yes.
I'm still coming to terms with those.
yeah,
Right.
they're really good. Casting Snuff Out and Scred, which are some of the best removal spells in the format, while benefiting from those was huge. But other than that, it was like Packmate was basically it. But if you looked at, from a PDH standpoint, there's a lot of really cool cards in there. A lot of really good stuff.
When looking at competitive PDH or 60 card Pauper, what's your philosophy when it comes to actually deck building and card choice?
Between 60 card and PDH?
Yeah.
I would say in CPDH, I am a bit of a one-trick pony.
It's all just birds.
Okay.
I understand the
It's
combos.
birds
No.
all the way down.
It's all just birds. Caw! Caw!
Love birds.
It's birds forever. Yeah, my first love
Bird gang.
really is for Murmuring Mystic and hashtag Bird Gang, of which Alcadron is. Our buddy Dave here was the first inductee into hashtag Bird Gang with Essior Kelleth alongside Murmuring Mystic.
Ooh, we are an esteemed company.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but you said one trick pony, and I had to make
Oh
the birds
yeah.
joke.
No, so yeah.
Sorry, please
I just
continue.
had to go-
One trick pony.
Yes, yeah. I'm just a one-trick pony. just Murmuring Mystic. But I think part of it is that I like to build mid-range decks. I like to build comboless control decks and mid-range decks, which kind of end up looking really similar, except that one has more aggressive creatures in it and the other one doesn't. So a good example would be like the overall outcome of a game with Mayhem Devil and like what you're trying to do with it in trying to control the board, establish a board presence, grind value is actually the same as Murmuring Mystic, except that Murmuring Mystic doesn't like need to end the game right away, and Mayhem Devil implies that you're going to end the game very quickly. So Murmuring Mystic doesn't care if it wins quickly or not, because eventually the birds are going to come and get you. One illusion peck at a time, and it's all in your head.
They're just coming at you.
Yeah, they're coming. And I like these decks because they possum incredibly well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you are playing in competitive, the ability to honestly say that most of the time you are not the problem grants you an enormous amount of leeway to enact your game plan.
Sure.
That's where I tend towards in PDH is towards these comboless mid-range decks. And that is different from what I do in Pauper. In Pauper, I play everything under the sun. In Pauper, I play Kiln Fiend decks, which are basically combo decks. I play Reanimator. I play mid-range decks like Grixis Dominatrix with the Wildfire, grinding value that way. I'll play like big mana control decks with Wildfire. We'll play token decks. The archetypes they're not as easily nailed down in 60 card as they are for me in CPDH, where you have Voltron decks trying to assemble some sort of combat damage win with your commander. You have some sort of combo deck. You're going to have mid-range decks that can transition between pressure and disruption very easily while being able to grind out through a mid and late game. And then you've got hard control decks. And then aggro decks, this is a whole discussion in of itself, but aggro decks in CPDH don't really exist.
Yeah.
In 60 card.
Now, why is that, do you think?
Yeah.
Like I've literally never played any CPDH, but I've always been kind of curious when I look up deck lists or hear you guys talking about it, there's literally never just, here's a bunch of goblins, like,
Aggro is
it's because counting to 90 is much harder than counting to 20.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And in Pauper, if you go turn 1 Foundry Street Denizen, turn 2 Mog War Marshal, turn 3 Kuldotha Rebirth, sacking your Great Furnace, and then Goblin Bushwhacker, you end the game and it doesn't matter how many cards you have.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter that you spent all your cards to like pump out damage all at once to kill somebody because they're dead. In CPDH, if you spend your cards early trying to kill one player, and because the card quality at common when it comes to creatures, they're just not as good. You don't have Tarmogoyf, you don't have Death Shadow, you don't have like these creatures that are like way above the curve. You just don't have as many of them. And so it's harder to end the game for all 3 players without just like either fizzling, trying to kill one, or killing one, and then the control players just sort of like end your career with just like, make your life miserable. So there are aggro decks, but they are mid-range decks inherently. They have to have card advantage. They have to have recursion. They have to have
that makes sense.
Resilience, and the cards have to replace themselves.
I would say that aggro in CPDH is kind of in the same spot that aggro in just regular EDH was a few years back. The card quality just doesn't exist yet. I don't know if you would agree with that, Ryan.
Yeah, and this will change over time. I mark my words on this because Fire Design at WotC is pushing a whole new paradigm of card printing where the cards are being designed to be powerful and fun in draft at common. And we see great examples of this with Jewel Thief, which is redefined a bear is, right? Like it's a 3 mana, 3/3 vigilance trample that gives you a treasure. It's not seeing play in Pauper that much, but it's setting a whole new standard. Monastery Swiftspear getting downshifted is a great example of this. With that in mind, there's no reason we couldn't get a Goblin guide. There's no reason we couldn't get, a Blood Artist. Like the doors are wide open because WotC wants draft to be fun. This is how they make a lot of their money alongside MTGA and all that. And so that's very promising for aggro because it means we might actually get some really powerful creature threats that could make aggro more viable in CPDH. That being said, CPDH aggro decks are generally going to either be Voltron decks because the difference in power level between an uncommon creature and a common creature is dramatic. You've got like Sailor's Bane being a 7/7 ward 4 for 2 blue and never gets any more expensive is better than any common creature ever printed.
Ever. Yeah.
And it's so far above the curve. It's Kappa Cannoneer at uncommon. It's Tarmogoyf, but way better in uncommon. So so that really, that's one of the places where you'll see aggros in Voltron decks. So it's not that aggressive strategies don't exist. It's that they have to look like a Voltron deck, or they have to look kind of like Mr. Orfeo, where you're playing aggressive creatures that are resilient to removal. They replace themselves, or they recur themselves, or they recover value through madness and blood tokens. But ultimately, there's a lot of card advantage in the deck. And it looks different from an aggro deck in 60 card, where there doesn't really need to be any card advantage, because if your opponent's dead, it doesn't matter if you drew cards. It doesn't matter if you're at 0 cards and 1 life if you win the game and they're dead. So, but PDH, you have to be able to take out the other players. And we had a lot of people in our league. I ran a CPDH league in my area here last time, and we had a lot of people try out aggro strategies with like Rograk, Ketis type stuff. and it was tragic. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Yep.
So what I'm hearing is white weenies will never be a competitive deck.
Which one was this?
White weenies.
White weenies.
No.
There is one deck that could do it. Help me with the name here. What was that new card that whenever tokens come into play, you scry. If there's another token comes into play, you draw for each turn, and it's mono white. Rumor Gatherer. This is a very interesting card. Somebody ought to be taking this on because using something like Recruit the Worthy or...
Pump the brakes just a second. Isn't Rumor Gatherer mostly just a lot worse than Mentor of the Meek?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. We just got Mentor of the Meek.
Yeah.
No, 100%. Rumor Gatherer does have the benefit of triggering on your opponent's turns. So if you like rally the peasants,
raise the alarm.
You raise the alarm. Good catch. And and also recruit the worthy and other token generators there. I don't know if this deck would be the deck that I would choose to take to a tournament because it's just not going to be very dynamic. Unfortunately, white has bad removal in Pauper. Unlike other formats. Someday we should, there was a moment there in time where Swords to Plowshares should have been legal in Pauper based on
It should have. There was
alchemy.
a little window.
There was a window. That's a whole other topic in of itself. But that would be a great downshift to give Pauper decks in white, especially in Pauper Commander, some form of good removal. So now in 60 card, there are staples that we always build around when I'm building a deck. And those cards are kind of immutable because they are legacy cards, and legacy as in not the format, but they're cards that came from earlier history. We've got Ponder, Brainstorm, and Preordain. And these cards are so not okay in other formats. Like that, you've got like Bosch and Roll and his t-shirt that says Island, Ponder, Go. Because that combination of cards, those two cards, is a keepable hand when you can look at 3 more cards and shuffle if you don't like it. So we have those cards. So a lot of times you're going to see those in play and they'll be, the basis of decks. I look at deck building in 60 card and in CPDH in terms of actually what's called the pattern language. And this is a concept that actually comes from permaculture. For folks that are familiar with the term, permaculture is like the study of how to create permanent civilization through agricultural practices and social practices. And they talk about the pattern language as a way of organizing things that go together in patterns that once you start to understand how it goes, it becomes kind of like a language that you can read. And I apply that to deck building because there are cards that go together in an ecosystem with friends. So if you're in black and you're doing artifact things, you probably want cranial plating. And if you want cranial plating, you probably want a lot of mana rocks. And if you're playing a lot of mana rocks, then suddenly it's like, you can play like a grindy mid-range game with the value that they generate and playing a big mana control deck, right? And so those things start to interlock in a way in which the sum of the parts, based on the sort of cards that are present that are really good, start to guide your deck building in predictable patterns. So like Mayhem Devil and Mr. Orfeo are almost the same deck in a lot of ways. They both play Blood and Treasure tokens. They both play mid-range, black, aggressive, evasive, recursive, value-generating threats that don't die to Bolt and they don't die to Snuff Out, Ghastly Demise, and Vendetta, or Doomblade, or Seal of Doom. And so there's these patterns that come out over and over and over again. And replicating those patterns, once you've identified them, is something that I do a lot when I'm building decks.
Okay.
So we see a lot of that in Pauper too. Galvanic Blast going along with the bridges, going along with the Deadly Disputes and the Reckoner's Bargains, and then, I like artifacts, so suddenly it's Blood Fountain, and Blood Fountain wants me to play creatures, and I'm casting all these spells, so I might as well play Gurmag Angler. It implies itself. There's answers to the deck building questions that imply themselves from the very get-go.
Okay,
Yeah.
So when you're talking
Very
about
well
this pattern language, would you say that's helping you to identify the archetypes that work well in 60 card Pauper? Yeah,
I think so. A good example would be the new initiative cards. I found when I was playing initiative in my 4-color, and it sounds like a meme, but I called it Dank Jund, and it was a 4-color wildfire deck.
Okay.
And wildfire decks kind of want to be 4 colors anyway, so that's a whole other topic. But when I played Monarch in that deck, what I noticed was that multiples of the Monarch kind of sucked because they don't stack, they don't do anything for each other. You kind of want to sandbag them.
Yeah.
So the card is almost like not a card in your hand until your opponent plays Monarch or gets it back from you. And when Initiative came out, it was like, oh, this is exactly what my deck is doing, because I've got a couple of very hard-hitting, hard-to-kill threats in the Wildfire archetype that we can ramp into that work well there. So that applying that pattern language to that deck, after playing that deck for a year straight, varieties of Wildfire Cascade, it was like I had a lot of data to work with about what was working and what wasn't. And so the Initiative cards were like instantly started playing with them. And then once I had 4 of them in the deck and I saw what they did and the fact that they stacked, it was like, oh, I want between 8 and 10 of these in the deck, actually.
Well, so my question is, why did you wait for the Initiative, and why didn't you mess around with something like the venturing into the dungeon mechanic?
Yeah, venturing in the dungeon was not attached to any good cards.
Okay.
And I think that specifically for 60
we had
card,
like Secret Door, and that was about it.
And Secret Door is uncommon, right?
No, it's common, but it only saw play in the Walls deck that could make just as much
Secret
mana as they
Door, 1
wanted
blue,
to.
0/4.
Secret Door.
Venture into the dungeon. Yeah. That was actually a good card, and that was really good for Sphinx Summoner. Very good card for that deck, as a tutorable win condition, and a blocker and an artifact and all that. But in Pauper, Venture into the Dungeon, it just wasn't attached to anything good aside from the Walls deck, which did that.
Yeah,
but the Walls
deck
deck largely wanted to do other things as well. So like the Walls deck has other ways of winning that don't involve the Secret Door. Secret
Door is like a Plan C win con.
Secret
for sure.
Door also doesn't activate at instant speed, which is a problem. Because if your opponent goes to kill it, once you activate it, you don't get to do it anymore. If it's instant speed and you can just like sink all your mana into it, then you win the game anyways, and the removal didn't matter. They had to have a counterspell. So there's that element. So yeah, venturing into the dungeon wasn't really worth in that case.
Okay.
However, I think in casual, I'm sure venturing into the dungeon was good. CPDH, no splash at all, except for I honestly can't say it. I can't say venturing into the dungeon was good at all prior to the Initiative.
Well, so then when you're taking this pattern language and trying to identify your various archetypes for 60 card, how does that change when you go to PDH and you go to that 100 card singleton format? Because when you look at things like let's use tribal as an example. In 60 card you have both tribal slivers, you have tribal elves, and you have tribal fairies.
Yeah.
But when you get to 100 card singleton, elves tend to still be pretty good because elves. Slivers tend to still
elf things.
Yeah, elf things. Slivers tend to be pretty good. A little lackluster in PDH just because we don't have the density at Pauper that other formats do, but they're still pretty decent. But then you get to fairies and you're like, oh, there's 5. So how does that
there's 5
pattern
fairies.
language and that recognition change when you change formats?
Yeah, that's a really cool question, because the pattern language has more. The answers are way clearer in 60 card because the best cards are way more obvious. Galvanic Blast is just like the best burn spell in the whole format, and it's probably one of the best kill spells. You're looking at these like in 60 cards, your best cards are often are pretty hard to overcome in terms of like printing something better that wouldn't just be like disgustingly broken in every other format. Like if you ever printed something that was better than Galvanic Blast, that would be a big deal. And so you've got a legacy of cards in 60 card that where the pattern language has very clear, obvious answers. Bolt and Galvanic Blast, Cast Down, Snuff Out, Chainer's Edict, Diabolic Edict, right? That kind of stuff.
If I can briefly interrupt, I think
go ahead.
a huge part of this distinction to me is that like Liam's question is about, you look at trying to build a PDH deck out of fairies, and like you run out of good fairies after 5. And a huge part of this is that 5 fairies is plenty for a 60 card deck, because that's 20 cards if you want them.
Yeah, because 5 equals
20 cards out of your 60 is huge. That's an enormous chunk of your deck.
Yes.
5 cards out of 100 is nothing. And like it's the same with, the Galvanic Blast, the Lightning Bolts, like the Edicts, like being able to run 4 of these in a 60 card deck gives you
Yep.
just a foundation. Whereas, you try to.
That's a really good point. I mean, if you just look at a deck that plays Cast Down, Bolt, and Galvanic Blast, that's 12 cards out of your 60 of the non-lands. And if you say most decks average 20 lands, then you're saying that 12 of the 40 cards are taken
That's
for
a third of your
automatically, like right off the bat. There's auto-include cards. That's a third of the deck. Yeah, and you're totally right. The fact that you have to find analogs to everything in PDH changes that equation a lot. And so so I think that in PDH when I'm building decks, and this is something that I'm very much still in the process of learning. This is a constant learning process, but it's something that I'm really excited to continue exploring and talking about and navigating. Is coming up with these packages that kind of want to go in decks, and then building decks with those things. You've got like your combo packages, but then in terms of non-combo packages, something that I work on a lot is blood treasures and cranial plating. That's a pattern language right there. And it implies a whole series of cards that are always going to be black creatures that either draw a card, have evasion on them, come back from the graveyard, or offer some repeat value, like Draugr Recruiter, maybe, that gets creatures back every time. And those cards want to go alongside Ceremonial Knife, and they want to go alongside, your Prying Blade and your Goldvein Pick, and they want to go alongside Galvanic Blast and Reckoner's Bargain and Lee Dispute, and now I'm sacking artifacts, so now I want to have Ichor Wellspring, and I also want to have Mana Rocks that also draw me cards, and they loot, so suddenly you're thinking Madness, because blood tokens are an amazing way to trigger Madness, right? Like, and you can see how that cascade happens there from one thing to the next, where the answer is implied for the cards that you want to take based on the colors you're in and the cards that you have for that package. So that is something I'd be really excited to see other people exploring all over Pauper, is what are these pattern languages and how do we not codify them so much, but like continue to evolve our understanding of what cards really want to go well together, and what as an ease of deck building kind of a thing. I think that's a really kind of exciting line of inquiry. You can do the same thing with combos to a degree. You've got your Banishing Knack. Let's see. You've got your Banishing Knack type combos with Retraction Helix, and that implies a certain set of cards, right? Like you're implying a certain set of cards like Battered Golem, Steelfin Whale, Mirren Spy, and then your payoffs are going to be either Cabal Paladin if you're in black, or you're going to be Reckless Fireweaver, Impact Tremors, Wily Roastmaster, Ingenious Artillerist, right?
There's another flavor of Knack combo as well.
Well, and the beauty of Banishing Knack and Retraction Helix is that they're also just removal spells.
Right.
Right? Like that's
so
perfect.
I think, weirdly, some of the best Knack decks in CPDH do not run the artifact lines with Golem. I think that 2 of the best Knack decks in the format are Parcel Beast and Puresight Marrow, whose goal is to put Knack on a creature that with an untap ability, and then try to resolve a High Tide or get what is it, the Civic Growth Chamber or whatever, these Karu double mana lands. Like you get one of those or a High Tide, and then you start knacking your own Peregrine Drake, or you knack your own Cloud of Fairies.
Yes.
Like that's a completely separate Knack line from the put Knack on the Battered Golem and start looping a Lotus Petal or whatever. Right.
And I guess what's interesting about those combos and about these things is that when you build those decks out with either an Ashnod's Altar, a Flicker combo, Freed from the Real, Persist, Knack, these combos all imply themselves, right? You just kind of like look for all the cards that flicker, or you look for all the cards that have, replicate, or, for a payoff, or you look for something that says each in the text. Those kinds of things. And so for combo, we have a pretty good understanding of what those are, what the enablers are, what the payoffs are, that sort of stuff. What I think specifically I'm talking about is the mid-range control type stuff, where it's not a combo so much as it is just a
you're
very
trying to figure
synergistic
out
value play.
what 60 cards go in
And I think
Mayhem
there's a
Devil.
lot of
That's where
exciting.
this is going. Out of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
400
Yeah.
cards you could use to put together a very good Mayhem Devil
Oh,
list,
God.
which 60 are correct?
Oh man, that is
Right.
Don't
The
put
60
that
that-
evil on us. Don't
The
put
60
that evil.
that populate when you
Mm.
it's the 60 that populate when you sort Scryfall by EDH rec.
Yep.
Yeah, that's an impossible one to answer, right? Mayhem Devil, for what it's worth, is to this day the very hardest Magic deck I've ever built in any format ever.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what to do.
No.
Like
Disciple combo lines are equally challenging to try and figure out. Like, you're
Oh.
looking at this and you're like, oh, here's the 37 different things I could do and the 400 different cards that I could use to make any
Mhm.
combination of those things happen. Which
yes.
12 are correct? And you're like, okay, so
Yeah.
Which ones
yeah.
do I want to play?
You know,
badly?
another good example that would be like
Right.
Saheeli. I think
Yes,
like
yes,
the two
yes.
hardest decks in the format to build are Mayhem Devil and Disciple of Deceit. But lest we not mention that Saheeli
Yeah.
also has just like a
Yeah, yeah.
metric crap ton
no, but
of possible cards. For those of you that play with
Yes.
Planeswalkers, that card is
I-
hard. That
I
deck
once-
is hard to build.
I once said,
Yeah,
I was
I imagine so.
talking with someone, and my boyfriend was nearby within earshot, and I mentioned that he had a Saheeli deck, and he's like, no. I have 5 halves of the Saheeli deck, and I don't know which two go together. I was like, okay, that's fair. Like,
Yeah,
that's completely
yeah,
valid.
absolutely.
That sounds about right.
Well, we have people in our league right now doing something really gross with Saheeli, which is that they
Oh.
actually have multiple versions of the deck purchased. And then when they sit down for their
Yep.
pod, they can play it as a combo deck
Yep,
or they
yep,
can
yep.
play it as a mid-range deck, and they do not have to disclose which they're doing, which is super rude. You could do the
That
same
is kind of rude.
yeah, you could do the same thing with Ashiok as well. You could just have a flicker deck that has a stacks piece in the command zone, or you could build it as a mid-range blue-black fairies deck or blue-black ninjas kind of a thing, or just a hard control deck, right? There's so many ways to do it. And so Mayhem Devil has that same thing. I just haven't figured out exactly what the deck looks like if it's not doing what mine is doing.
Right,
I'm experimenting
exactly.
a little bit with Is It Guildmage these
Ooh,
days.
yeah.
'Cause there's
Yeah.
there's like 5 different really powerful combo lines you can run in the Guildmage, and jamming all 5 of them in there is absolutely a mistake. Like, you need to have sort of this critical mass of like control and interaction to be able to function as a deck, which leaves you room for like 2 or 3 of these combo lines. And trying to figure out which 2 or 3 give you the most consistency and the most reliability, while also
Yeah.
leaving you the most room for interaction has been a huge challenge.
Yeah.
So I'm
totally.
like experimenting with like I have all these like packages set aside for like if I want to play the arcane version, I'll add these cards and I'll cut these other cards, and like it's a whole science. It's very
Yeah,
entertaining though.
absolutely.
Yeah, it really is.
And
It really
it's on
is.
such
Oh,
a
this is-
smaller scale than the Mayhem Devil thing though, because it really is like me changing out like maybe 10 cards at most and leaving the rest of the interaction package like untouched. But like, yeah, Mayhem Devil's that, but like much broader in scale.
Mayhem
Right.
Devil was nicely tuned. I took a razor and my buddy and I play tested it extensively, and we cut it down to the marrow. Only the finest cards could go in Mayhem Devil. And then Baldur's Gate came out and they put 15
Get
new cards in my
wrecked.
hands.
Just
And I can't say I'm unhappy about it
Yeah.
because Merit
Yep.
is a very broken card in that deck. And Nefarious
Sure.
Imp and just everything is just so good. But I will say that it made updating my deck database entry really, really hard. And I've got to write about it. And I've got to justify these cards coming in and out. Like,
Right.
woe betide me and my free time.
What were you gonna say?
Well, this had.
So
oh, go
I
ahead.
was going to say that we are at about 90 minutes of
go
recording
right
so
ahead.
far. So I think that we should probably move in the direction of wrapping things up. But there is one,
Yes.
hopefully really quick topic that I want to bring up real quick, and that is
Yep.
if we're going to talk about card evaluation between 60 card Pauper and PDH, I think this podcast would not be complete if we didn't mention which cards are powerful enough to ban in these formats and how the ban lists between them have zero overlap.
Yeah, you can play Rhystic Study in.
You can. You shouldn't, but you can.
No.
Which I think is hilarious.
Are we talking cards that are already banned or ones that we want to see banned?
Already banned.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The Pauper ban list is weird. There are some cards that do not belong on there, and there are a lot of cards that do. And this is a whole can of worms and a whole follow-up discussion. We could wax poetic for another 2 hours on this.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's another episode. But that
what do you do next week?
Yeah, right. Hey, same time, same place. So for Pauper Commander, I think largely the ban list is where it needs to be. Sans 2 cards, Oubliette and Vanishing.
No, not Oubliette.
Both are cards that inflict phasing on a creature. Phasing, as people know, means that you do not get your commander back to recast it. This is extraordinarily toxic. It skirts around how the game is supposed to be played, because phasing over exiling is just having the added benefit of taking whatever's on it with it.
Well,
and also
most notably,
not ETBs and not LTBs. Yeah. Well, so I'm talking about for just normally casting phasing in a Magic game 60 card. The only reason you'd play Oubliette is because you get the devotion,
I see.
and because the phasing takes with it a Rancor, or it takes with it all sorts of other stuff. It takes the equipments and things with it too. So that's kind of worth sometimes in a limited capacity. But in PDH and in EDH, where it takes your commander and denies that person access to it for the rest of the game, it's really it's not how the game is supposed to work.
That's not Garfield magic.
And it's fundamentally problematic in a format where the uncommon creatures incentivize you to build around them, because they're so much better than commons. That your decks are built around this thing that if it gets oublietted, your deck doesn't work until you unlock that thing from it. If I'm now playing blue and black, you better damn bet that I am not going to let you have your commander back. I'm going to counter your return to nature. I'm going to counter
everything, your
debt to the commie, and it's going to feel really bad. It feels bad to ban a card from a color that isn't blue because it doesn't feel like it needs it. But Vanishing and Oubliette are those two. On the Pauper ban list, Prophetic Prism and Baldurs Ornament being on the ban list is an absolute joke. Those cards are the fairest cards I could possibly imagine. Baldurs Ornament gives your opponent cards if they're playing it too. Like, I have been milled out by Tron decks who countered the Abrade that I cast on my own Baldurs Ornament so that I didn't mill myself out due to them drawing me cards. They let me have the Monarch, and then they just milled me out with Baldurs Ornament. When I went to stop them, they countered my Abrade, so I couldn't kill my own Baldurs Ornament.
That's wild.
It's wild, right? And Baldurs Ornament's a perfectly fine card. The issue is not Baldurs Ornament, it's Tron. Urza lands have always been a cancer on most formats they've been in. 1+1+1 does not equal 7. I've been to math class at times.
Yeah,
and it's awful. So I think we could, if the cards that ought to be on there is Baldurs Ornament, it should be taken off. Prophetic Prism is not the problem with Affinity.
Right. This has turned into a much bigger discussion than I intended. I think the quick point I was just trying to make is the current PDH is exactly 2 cards. It is Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora. And I think it's fascinating because these cards are actively terrible in 60-card Pauper, and there's no reason to ban them, and they are just not only are they not banned, they just don't see any play ever. So that gives you a very interesting insight into card evaluation. From the other side, if we're looking at, Gitaxian Probe, Gush, what else?
It does.
Daze.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We're looking at Grape Shot. Grape Shot is banned. Oh, fascinating. So if we're looking at these cards that are banned in 60-card
Grape
Pauper...
Grape Shot, yeah.
Yeah.
No. So we're slipping back into what should or shouldn't be banned.
The storm mechanic should just be banned.
That's later.
That's right there.
Later. But if we look at which cards are banned in 60-card,
sorry.
Interesting. When you say should these cards be banned? Like, are these cards powerful enough to warrant a ban in PDH? The answer is a resounding no. Like, they're all very fair, very balanced. Like, they're still strong cards. You'll see them in competitive games, but they're not gonna break the game.
No, yeah, and
Right.
Hilarious.
Extremely fair.
High Tide was never legal in Pauper. It actually began its life on the ban list. It didn't actually. It was never
Right.
actually legal. And High Tide is a card that if it were ever banned in CPDH, I wouldn't have strong feelings about it, but I would understand why. Blue rituals are
no, it
not
doesn't.
okay.
I don't think it deserves a ban in PDH.
I don't think it deserves a ban. I
Yeah,
agree. I don't have strong feelings on banning that card. I'm just saying if it were banned, I wouldn't be
So
surprised.
I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen High Tide do things in EDH that I've yet to see
Yeah.
even pale to do in
Yeah.
PDH.
And
Yeah,
it does work
absolutely.
in PDH. There's a lot of combos that it enables, but like you have to really work for them. Like you're
Yeah.
opening yourself up to interaction. Like when you open up your combo with a High
They're
Tide,
not
you just gave
undeserved.
every other blue tech at the table with all of their counter spells twice as much mana to try and ruin you. And now it's a 3v1,
Yep.
and like you double your mana, but
Yep.
you also double all of theirs. So like it's a very
Yes.
right. It's a very balanced
Everybody
card
with one blue
in
instead
the
has two.
PDH scene, which I think is fascinating. That's
Right.
the entirety
Yeah.
of the point I wanted to make about these bannings is that
Yeah.
there's zero overlap between these two, and that should give you some
Yeah.
really interesting insights into what is very powerful in PDH and what is very powerful in Pauper, and the massive differences between those things.
Yep. Absolutely. And one of the places you see people make mistakes is people in
Right.
Pauper coming to PDH and thinking that they should play all the banned cards. And the banned cards, there are good banned cards, but a lot of them are actually just not that good.
Yeah.
And
When you get one,
I see a huge mistake I see is people showing up and just putting Faithless Looting
Oh,
into
God.
every red deck. And it's like, no. Like, this card isn't banned because it's good generically.
Yeah.
This card was banned because it does discard things. And yet the rest of your deck is not doing discard things. Like, why is this in your deck?
And but here's the thing that's funny is that that mistake is shared with Pauper players. Pauper players also chronically put a card disadvantage spell in aggro decks and in control decks. And it's like, what are you doing? Like there's two decks where Faithless Looting is very good in Pauper, 60 card. And those decks are doing very fair. Well, one of them is doing very fair things with Faithless Looting. The other one resembles legacy stuff. The first one is Boros Bully, which is pitching Prismatic Strands, Rally the Peasants, and Faithless Looting, and Battle Screech into the graveyard. And so you're basically drawing two cards and then pitching two cards in the graveyard, so it's 1 mana draw 2. That's when Faithless Looting is at its best, right? The other time it's at its best is when it efficiently puts big things in the graveyard to bring back with a reanimation spell. And that's basically it. Like, and it's just not an insane card. It doesn't warrant inclusion in most red decks, and a lot of people make that mistake. It's a common one.
That is
yeah.
all I wanted to add to the slow sort of wrap up of the already very long
20 minutes.
I know, right? And we're wrapping up.
Rip my life. All right.
I'm gonna pass things over to Brad so he can outro us. What do you think, Brad?
Okay.
Final thoughts?
Well, before we get to the outro, I did just want to see if. No, you're good. I met Ryan, like I said earlier, through the Discord. And like every week or every couple days, it seemed like he was posting huge, pictures from your LGS, all these people playing. Your local meta had great numbers, great diversity of decks, and all that sort of stuff. And that's one thing I tried to get off the ground here at my local shop before, obviously, the world caught on fire. Mm-hmm. But I was just wondering if, you seem to have maintained that, if not helped it even grow in the last couple of years. I just wonder if you had any sort of tips, for listeners, any sort of quick tips about starting a community, fostering it. It could be 60 card Pauper, it could be PDH, either one, working with your shop to promote it.
Absolutely.
Sort of thing.
And I'm actually going to give you all a little sneak peek on a manifesto I will be writing on this, or a recipe that I'm going to be writing on this at some point with the new channel that I'm starting. And I have some great advice from the trenches on how to do this, because I've been at it for 7 years now. And I've only missed, I think, 6 or 7 weeks through that time. And there are some really key things. And one of them is Pauper offers us the opportunity to build a lot of decks for very cheap. Competitive decks where people are going to feel comfortable playing them and that they're not getting shafted by borrowing a deck.
Right.
$300 is going to get you the tackle box you need to hold the decks, 5 decks, and the sleeves and the boxes for them to build a starter battle box.
You guys put your decks in sleeves?
Oh yeah. Well, so the thing is that these decks are they're very heavily used by a lot of new players. And they get destroyed. These sleeves, I'm using Dragon Shields, and they get mauled, like absolutely mauled. So yeah, definitely sleeves. I wouldn't have some of these decks if they weren't. And that's a really big one. That's pretty easy to do. The other thing is you need to have a central place. A Discord is a great place to start for people to communicate. A third thing, and this is kind of, if you can manage it, is to start building a skill set with free design softwares like Canva so that you can make event posters. The other thing is just to go in and ask your LGS if they have a time during the week that is unoccupied by an event that you could host Pauper events in.
Yeah, I've noticed that, with the LGS, if you show them that you are willing to basically host the event, they'll let you have the room.
There's no reason to not. The other thing is to make a strong argument for why Pauper should be a core part of their store. And the argument there is that Pauper is the most inexpensive, most accessible way to play Magic. And the combination of Pauper and Pauper Commander opens up this whole new world of gameplay with both multiplayer and single player for both competitive and casual on both the 60 card and on the on the multiplayer 100 card singleton. And I think that there's a really good argument to make that every store ought to be replicating what we did here in Bellingham as a way to introduce people to the format. It's very hard for me to sell somebody on Modern, because Modern is so many hundreds or thousands of dollars, but I can sell somebody on a $25 to $75 deck, especially if they can borrow one of my decks. And many people do exactly this. They borrow my decks for several weeks, they win a couple of times, and they use their store credit to buy the exact deck that they borrowed. And that's a really beautiful synergistic way to get people into Magic. So that's really cool. A lot of people too, who are coming back into Magic, they have huge collections and they can build most of the decks. They have most of the cards already. So it's just great that way. And this has been so effective, in fact, that there is a guy I'm friends with at Wizards of the Coast who actually tells the story of what we did for Pauper here at my store to every one of his business clients, store business clients that they manage, because it's been so successful. And it's really, really good.
Wow.
So, but here's the most important thing. And I this is maybe a heavier point, but I think it's really important to talk about this, is that one time I was on stream with a major content producer for Magic, and he's very aggressive about enforcing his rules, which are community guidelines to ensure that people treat each other with respect, which basically boils down to don't call each other names, and keep your hands off other people. And people give him a lot of grief for aggressively banning people who give him money. He said something that stuck with me that was, people oftentimes criticize me for aggressively banning people who are my supporters. What they don't realize is all the people that stay in my community because those people are gone. And I have had to ban and remove people from my communities all the time and give out warnings all the time. And a community is... I
don't think you can foster a healthy community without doing such.
Every community requires sacrifice to maintain. And notably, it needs that sacrifice for people to feel safe, to people to feel comfortable. A vast number of the people that are in my local meta only play in my local meta because they belong to the LGBTQ plus community. They're trans, they're non-binary, and they just don't feel safe elsewhere. And they come to mind because we actively weed our community of people who are unwilling or unable to adapt to our community guidelines. And it's a really, really important thing that as a community leader, you need to be able to embrace, is that your community will be bigger and better, and everybody's going to have a much better time if you aggressively enforce those community guidelines, because Magic implicitly has a lot of toxicity in it from Magic players coming from nerdy communities that have been had bad things done to them. They've been bullied, and they do that to other people. They gatekeep and they do things like that. And you have to keep those things out. And by doing so,
there's no room for that.
There isn't. And by doing so, the beauty of it is then not only is the format itself accessible and welcoming for new players, but then your community itself is welcoming and inclusive to people of all walks of life, of all dispositions, right? And so I will leave the listeners with that as a pretty profound lesson that I've learned having to enforce those rules. And
as a moderator of the PDH home.
Yeah, I'm sure you have to deal with it all the time too. And it's really just as simple as saying, hey, we run by these guidelines, and we need you to do differently. And if you can't, then you'll have to. This is a cool treehouse, and we want everybody to be included, but you can't be in the treehouse if you aren't going to behave yourself. So that would be my biggest recommendation to people. And that's the hardest to do. So.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, it absolutely is. It's confrontation. It's all the uncomfortable stuff, but it has to be done. That was really well said. But I think we're gonna get on out of here. We do want to thank everyone that tuned in this week, as usual. In the meantime, if you need more Pauper Commander talk or have any questions about the format or anything else, really, if you just want to chat, you can always email the show at thepdhpod@gmail.com. You can head on over to PDH Homebase's website or their Discord. You can hit me up on Twitter at Pauper_B. You can find Liam at Pauper Command. As always, you can find Dave at Dave the Alcadron all over the place. Discord, Reddit, Moxfield, wherever PDH is being talked about. And then Ryan, tell the listeners where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me at Pauper on Discord, in the PDH Homebase, in the competitive tryhards gaming community, which we may have links for these that we can provide people, and also the CEDH Budget Brews server, where we have the deck database hosted for competitive Pauper Commander. I also am in the nascent phase and process of starting my own YouTube channel, as well as making some of my own audio content as well. And you can find me on Moxfield at Pauper as well, where my primers are stored.
Yeah, we're all pretty excited for your content coming soon, so that should be fun. Did we miss anything else? Liam, Dave, you guys have anything you want to add?
Nope, you've got it all.
Oh, one last thing. The channel that is coming is going to be called The Common Connoisseurs. And so keep an eye out for it. We'll have updates soon, because all of us are we're connoisseurs of fine common cardboard. And
I thought you were calling me a very plain and regular connoisseur.
That's right. Yeah, well, thanks for having me on today. It was really super fun to chat with you all, and
no problem.
I look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Yeah, it was our pleasure.
Yeah, come back.
Come back.
We'll talk about bands.
Nope,
sometime.
go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Maybe I'll come back and I'll interview one of you guys. We'll do a little remix.
Yeah.
Right.
Heck yeah.
All right. Well, as episode 6 of the PDH pod comes to a close, I want to thank MTG Brad for letting us use their original music for the show. And one last thanks to Big Papa Pauper for coming on board, letting us chat with him, talk his ears off for a couple hours. And from everyone in here to everyone out there, brew a deck and play some games, and we'll see you in about a week. Peace.
Cheers.
I brought Pauper decks to the party. I brought Pauper decks to the party.